senior here at Davidson. This is actually my second senior year. I did 2 months the first time around, took 2 years off, and now I'm back. This is the culmination of my independent study last semester that I designed. And I'm looking at race, ethnicity, and stereotypes through social networking and through the internet. Dr. Fairley was kind enough to let me do this and let me put it together. So I'm happy to share my research with you guys. A lot of the stuff that we touched on in the last presentation is going to be present in this presentation. So I guess first thing to say is that this is a presentation, and everything in it, like much of history, is purposeful. From the way I'm dressed to the vernacular that I'm going to be using once we get started. Part of the problem with, I guess, racism is that there was this lady named Chimamanda Achebe. She's a Nigerian author. And she said part of the problem with racism and stereotypes is that you start in the second, or you start in the middle of the story and you don't start at the beginning. So what we are going to do before we even get into this presentation is start at the very beginning of where all this stuff kind of comes from and why we end up being in the situation and the place and seeing some of the images that we're seeing today. So before we even get started, I'm going to break a couple things down so we're all on the same page and that we're all working with the same definitions. And that's race, racism, ethnicity, and this thing, this concept called Web 2.0. Race is a social construct. It means that it was created in the minds of people and it exists in the minds of people. It was originally based in science and it was originally based in biology, and this is something that you can actually research, that you can actually go back and look, and then around the early 1400s to mid 1400s is when you start seeing these essays coming out that people have characteristics based on biology, that people have certain brain sizes, that people have certain personality traits, that people have affinities towards certain behavior because of what's going on in their genetics. This has since been disproved, but it is originally the basis for race. Racism is the things that were created around this belief that people are biologically different that is used to support this thing, this concept of race. And it takes a lot of different forms. It's going to be shown in the form of videos. It's going to be shown in the form of movies. But it's also something that's a part of revisionist history. We've actually gone back and changed fantasy stories that were once different, but now the way that we know them, they're different. And it's intentional. These things were actually done. These things were actually purposefully designed and written and propagated to institutionalize this concept that people are different biologically. And with that comes a racial hierarchy. Hit me. So you go back to things like King Arthur. When you think of King Arthur, you think of medieval times at all. You think of a bunch of white people. When you think of pretty much anything before slavery, you think of a bunch of white people. Also, when you think of sci-fi movies, fantasy, the main protagonist in Disney movies, it's almost completely whitewashed. And what this does is supports and advances a racial hierarchy. One of the biggest flaws and the biggest pitfalls when we talk about racism, and we talk about races, we want to limit it to hateful action and intentional action, and I don't like this person because of the color of their skin, but that's not what racism is. Racism is the entire fabricated system and the entire fabricated history, and its sole purpose is to support this concept of race, which is an institution of racial hierarchy. And this is something that everybody's born to. Everybody that's alive here had pretty much nothing to do with the creation of the system. You're born into it, and from the second you slapped on the bottom at the hospital, you're bombarded with this fake history. You're bombarded with these fake tellings of these stories. You're bombarded with these images like you see in the Disney Channel, and you learn to believe things about yourself and other people, no matter which side of the coin you fall on. So initially, it's not your fault. Once you find out, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. So I want to show you guys a couple things that is documented to have been a changing of history and a changing of fantasy that goes to support this concept of race and this racial hierarchy. I talked a little bit about King Arthur. A lot of people don't know that there were black knights in King Arthur's court. In fact, there's this concept of the black knight who is dressed in all black armor, and he's patterned after this guy named Sir Morian. Sir Morian was the youngest knight in the fictional King Arthur's court. He was 1.5 feet taller than everybody, and he was dark. He was dark in the face, All his armor was dark, and he was a complete beast. If you go back and read the actual battle scenes, and you read the way that he speaks, he's eloquent, he's fierce, and initially when he comes up, they have static because he's like a new guy. And they're talking like, who's this guy rolling up on this horse? He thinks he's fly, and he's like, look, guys, I ain't offend you, he's dope. And so when they first see him in battle, they actually like he's a great knight, and he gets accepted in the King Arthur's court. Because of the retelling of history and the retelling of fantasy, most people don't know that people of color have existed in every place, in every segment of society, and every time period for the history of the world. Another thing that has been whitewashed and kind of changed is religion. When you think of this guy named King David, you think of kind of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy with a slingshot. This is a picture that was taken from a 12th century Bible in Greece, where a lot of the Bible was created and translated. And I'll blow it up for you a little bit. This is from the book of Psalms, and it's actually a picture of King David and his musicians as depicted in the 1100s. And this is what the Greeks were reading and were using to teach about David, teach about the Bible, teach about Psalms. You never see this anymore. And it's intentional that you never see this. And if you're never exposed to it, the way that you start to believe and see the world and see other people can be a little bit skewed. And it wasn't that everybody was of color back then, but there was a mix. There were people of color in the Roman Senate. There were people of color in agents, just everywhere. Just everywhere, there have always been people of color. But to support this racist ideology, which is just supporting the concept that people are different based on their biology, and that one biological group is better than another, you have to go back and you have to change this stuff. Because if you're saying that this one group is all-powerful and this one group is the smartest, and then you're seeing Black Knights, and you're seeing King David, who for a lot of people is a demonstration of a great relationship with God. The Bible says that David was a man after God's own heart. As a person of color, you're kind of going to rebel and question some of the things that you're taught from the second you're born, and it goes against the system completely. Also, when you talk about the slave trade, they don't tell the whole story. We think about slavery, and we think about some guys went over there of European descent, threw some nets over some people, brought them back. Wasn't a lot of rebellion, wasn't a lot of pushback. This is a story, it's called The Perfect Massacre. There was a ship called the Perfect Ship, and it had a cargo shipment full of slaves, and they were heading out of Gambia. They got about an hour out of Gambia, and were ambushed by Gambian warriors, and they came and they completely decimated everybody. We always hear about all of the lives that were lost in the slave trade, and they had to throw cargo overboard because people were drowning and people got sick. Not one of the slaves that was captured in Gambia ended up in America, because people have been fighting back and rejecting this thing for the entirety of the system. We just don't hear these stories, and it's intentional. You gotta understand that it's intentional, it's fabricated, and it's not real. If you go back and you see the actual history of the world, and the actual telling of stories like Dante's Inferno, like Odysseus, oh my gosh, the Odyssey, there's people of color illustrated, like actually drawn in the original text of all of these things, but through revisionist history and revisionist fantasy, it's changed into thinking that the only people in the standard of normalcy is the absence of color. This has an effect on children. Right now, there's been a study that comes out that in most of the countries in the world, if you ask a child under the level 3 or 3rd grade, depending on what country you're in, to write a fictional story, they write a story about a person with white skin. No matter what their own ethnicity, no matter what country they live in, no matter where they're from, no matter what their parent structure, when they write fictional stories, they write these stories about generally English or American characters that do English or American things. You have people in Nigeria, you have people in India writing these stories, and we can't say that it's not because of the way that we're teaching people what the world was and how the world existed. There's a difference between racism. I forgot about this one. Man. These are cartoons, and actually I watched this growing up. I was a Tom and Jerry fan. I watched Looney Tunes, and this is what the original cartoons looked like that you were brought up realizing. And so it's not something that you choose. It's not a conscious decision that you make that says, I don't like people that wrap their hair at night. that have dark colored skin. I don't like people that have these features, but you're fed it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And so when we're talking about racism, and we're talking about pushing back against racism, it's not just the hate, and it's not just the action, but it's the entire constructed history and constructed fantasy and constructed view of the world in existence that you have to question. You have to say, hey, that might not be right. That might not be cool. There's a difference between ethnicity and race. We already discussed that race is this concept that people are different based on biology, and that one biological group is better than the other. It's fake. It's been disproved that it's fake. Today, they've actually tested the DNA from people of different racial groups, and you can't tell based off of somebody's DNA what ethnicity are. It's impossible to tell just off of a DNA sample whether somebody is considered to be white, black, Asian, or anything else, because it doesn't manifest in a biological manner. There have been studies on brain size, there have been studies on propensity for action that have all been disproved, and the science largely has been disassociated. But because of the system that's in place, and the system that we use to teach ourselves about the world, and about history, and our religious beliefs, and what we think of as entertainment, has been embedded with this stuff for so long, we still carry these things now in 2014, when everybody pretty much doesn't like it, but we don't really know how to get out of it. Ethnicity is real though, and you can be discriminated based off of ethnicity. Ethnicity is based on commonality. It might be the same region that you're from. You might have a similar culture. You might have similar language. You may have similar religious beliefs. Example of an ethnicity that was discriminated against was Jewish people. That's real. That's a tangible group, and they were, victims of an almost ethnic cleansing. Irish people at the hands of the English, that's an ethnicity. That's a group based off of commonality that was discriminated against. Sometimes you can change your ethnicity. You can go from being Rasta to Christian or American or whatever it is, but you can also be discriminated against. But don't confuse it with race. Black people are kind of unique in this regard, and it's important to make this distinction, and I wish we had another name for it. But there's the black race, which is just anybody of African descent that might have dark skin, that might have phenotypes, or that has ancestors in Africa. There's also a black ethnicity, a black culture, which is a specific group of people that grew and had ancestors that were American slaves. There's music that's associated with it. There's a type of language that's associated with it. It's called African American Vernacular, which is finally being recognized as a legitimate English dialect. When you get into high levels of study for other languages, like Spanish, you start learning dialects. You start learning how to speak to the people that grew up in that region. You start learning Russian dialects and German dialects and all the different, oh my gosh, there's so many dialects in like Asian cultures, like Chinese, Japanese, like it gets very, very specific. For the longest, because of the institution of racism, and because of the way that we're taught to think about people that are different from an established normalcy, we've considered Ebonics or African American vernacular as a sign of unintelligence or a sign of, lower mental capacity. But it's actually its own language with its own verbal and linguistic and written rules of conduct. And you can misspeak African American vernacular and people will correct you. That's part of the So, there's this concept of the post-racial society, and that we're past race, and that doesn't exist anymore. And obviously it does. But why, as obvious as it is, do we even have this question? Do we even have this concept that we're past this and that this doesn't exist anymore, that this doesn't affect us anymore? It's because society has evolved. Society has changed. There were things that were okay to do and say to people previously that are not okay anymore. We know a lot more about how to relate to each other. People fought back against certain things, and we're doing things differently. But when society evolves, and society is built around and based on a racist structure, and a racist history, and a racist fantasy, and a racist belief system, racism evolves. So now we have this thing called subtle or subversive racism. And it's kind of under the floorboards of society. It's kind of in the foundation of society. And we don't necessarily have lynchings as much. I'm from Mississippi, we still have lynchings. A little while ago, they found a guy hung from a telephone pole by his belt. And they said he committed suicide. And if you're going to commit suicide, you don't climb a telephone pole and, hang yourself with a belt. But subtle subversive racism, now it's embedded in these different things, these different ways of thinking, and it's not as permanent. So you actually have to look for it, and you have to actually question the way that you're looking at yourself. You have to question the way that you're looking at other people. You have to question why you think certain things are beautiful and what's made you think that these things are beautiful. Why you think that certain things are funny and what's made you think that these certain things are funny. Because everything that you've been taught, to no fault of your own, has led you into this belief system, and you carry it. Once you realize this, it is then the onus on you. There's no more absolution. There's no more, it's not my fault, I can't do anything about it. But if you're not fighting against this system, you're supporting it. And there's no middle ground. There's no Switzerland. You can't do it. If you're not actually working against the system and calling it out, then you're supporting it and you're furthering it. And then we have questions like, is the Disney movie thing intentional or not? Who cares? It's not okay, and you need to say something about it. This brings us to the internet. Web 1.0 was not a term before Web 2.0. But the original internet, before the internet as we know it today, was largely producer-based. In that companies, governments, institutions, colleges, they put on content up on the internet, and then people would go and interact with that content. Midway through this era, you had little chat bars that were set up on the side, and consumers could interact with each other, users could interact with each other. But largely, right until the turn of the century, 2000, we have what is known as a producer-based internet. In 1999, this guy named Tim O'Reilly at a web conference was credited with the term Web 2.0, and then we call it the previous era, Web 1.0. Web 2.0 is the transition and now the promulgation of a user-based internet experience. This is where you have Facebook coming into play. It's where you have Twitter. It's where you have blogs. This is where everything that you see on the internet now, even if it's produced by a producer, has share buttons and comment buttons and like buttons, because we've entered into an age of a user-generated content web. When you have people generating content, whatever it is that they're carrying, they're going to generate as well. So if you have a racist society and a racist person, and we have all these ideas about beauty, we have all these ideas about history, and the lady on Fox, Jesus has to be white, which is understandable why she understands this, because everything that she's ever been shown about anybody for her entire life is white. You're going to have these racist things being generated, and that's originally what my study was to focus on. And that's how all this fits together, is when you have this new concept of the internet, where we are the people that are putting what's on the web out there, and not necessarily just institutions, but everybody here can contribute and can add to the fabric of the internet. We're all going to bring the things that we carry in our own minds, in our own socialization, and in our own lives to the internet. And this can be a good thing or a bad thing, but now there's more of a range of things that you're going to see on the internet. And what this does is something that's really, really cool. There's something called an imagined audience. And psychologists are studying this with the advent of social networking and user-generated content. Even though we're putting things on the internet, which is open for everybody to see, we have in our minds people that we're talking to. When you post something on Facebook, you don't view yourself as putting something out for the entire universe to see, but you're talking to your friends. You're talking to your family. You're talking to your coworkers. There are people in your life or people that are in your realm of experience that you imagine that you're speaking to when you're putting this stuff out. When you post your pictures on Instagram, you don't see yourself as putting pictures up for the whole world to see, but you see yourself as putting things up for your friends, for your family, for your classmates. What happens is your private life becomes public. This can be contentious because some things in your life should stay private and not become public. But this also is really useful in terms of sociologists and anthropologists trying to analyze racism. Because with the evolution of society and the advent of subversive racism and subtle racism, it kind of comes into the private life and it comes behind the doors. But with this advent of social networking, the imagined audience, and when you're putting out content, you think you're talking to people that you're actually not talking to. The people that you think you're talking to, you feel comfortable saying things that you wouldn't say in polite society because of the way society is evolved. And so this is why you will see people say and do things over social networking that they would never ever say or do in public. And this applies to politicians as well as younger kids. When kids put stuff on the internet and their parents find out, like, oh my gosh, how my parents find out? It's on the internet. But you think you're talking to your friends. You think you're talking to your classmates. You think you're talking to your coworkers. If you're a senator, you think you're talking to the same people that you've been having drinks with for the past 10 years. And you've been saying all this stuff in private, but because of the imagined audience, now your private thoughts and your private actions are available for the world to see. For anthropologists and social scientists, what we can do with this is actually get an idea of what people are really thinking and really saying in private homes that they would never admit to in the surveys that we conduct, in the interviews that we conduct, in the ethnographies that we go and write. It's not okay to say, hey, this is the way I feel about people with this kind of hair and this type of color. But because of the imagined audience, you're not talking to a social scientist anymore, even though I can go and pull it and put in a presentation. You're talking to your friends and you're talking to the people that you've been saying this stuff to all the time. Also, the internet is permanent. It used to be permanent. It's changing. There might be a Web 3.0. There's this app called Snapchat. Younger people know about it. Snapchat is an app where you can send somebody a picture and set a time limit on the picture. And the picture is saved to a server temporarily. And then whatever the time limit that you set for it is deleted. And so the creators of this, their whole concept is destroying the permanence of the internet and having interactions as we see them right now. We're never going to have this interaction. You and I are never going to be speaking to each other, looking eye to eye again. And it's going to be a memory. Translating that to an internet experience. I don't know how well it's going to work. I hope it's cool. It's a dope concept. But as of now, things like Facebook, Instagram, blogs, they're permanent. You put it on there, it's there forever until you delete it. And sometimes if you delete it, it's still there. Also with the advent of screenshots, which you're going to see a lot of screenshots that I've actually, all the pictures, everything that I've used in this presentation is from social network. So you can take screenshots, you can take pictures, and permanently capture the things that people are saying and doing, even if they go on that. The permanence of the internet prevents backtracking. It prevents people from going back and doing kind of like what they're doing with the slave trade now and saying, no, this didn't happen. No, we didn't think this way. No, we didn't have these things. No, this type of behavior didn't occur. Now it's documented, it's permanent forever. And this is really the first time in the history of the world that your day-to-day thoughts and your day-to-day interactions and your day-to-day happenings and where you're going and what you're eating is documented in a permanent and lasting way. Sucks for society, but for academics and sociologists, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. So, race, ethnicity, and the internet. This picture is from a birthday party in Austria, and a lady by the name of Olivia decided that she wanted to have an African-themed birthday party. This was taken off of her Facebook. She deleted my friend request. Everybody at the party was pretty much a person of non-color. But you see them dressing up as Klansmen, you see them dressing up as Aboriginals, and all these different kinds of things. And this is just reflecting of the view that we kind of hold of people and what we associate with different races and what we associate with different cultures. This is a demonstration of what we're talking about with the imagined audience. Her party went viral. She got so much backlash. She got so many blog criticisms. There were so many academic scholars writing about why this party was not okay, and why people dressing up as Klansmen and dressing up in blackface and doing all these stereotypical things was not okay. And so she ended up on her Tumblr writing a letter of apology. And this is just a couple excerpts from it. In her apology, she didn't say, hey, what I did was wrong. This wasn't okay, and maybe we need to re-examine how we're thinking about things and how we're doing things and why it is that we're doing and thinking the way we are. But she says, I know nobody's gonna see this. So I understand that this has offended some people, and I have no idea how these photos have ever been seen. They were simply put on Facebook for my guests to see the photos of themselves. This is the imagined audience that we're talking about. So I had no idea that anyone other than friends and guests could see these photos, and to be honest, I'm not a racist person at all, so I didn't think anyone could possibly take it that way. And this, you know, is important to really get a grasp of. Because she views racism as hate, because she views racism as actively trying to hurt somebody else and actively trying to demonize somebody else. She doesn't view her actions or her perspective as a racist act. But when you start to understand what it is, and that it's the history and the ways of thinking and the structure that's surrounded around completely and only purposely for supporting and entrenching this concept of race and racial hierarchy, you see it a little bit different. But in her mind, she's not racist. And she's probably a sweet girl. She probably had a lot of fun at the party. But because, you gotta be drunk to do some of this stuff. She doesn't see it that way. But this is what's important about the imagined audience and what we look at when we're talking about social networking. There are two types of social media interaction. There's communal and there's personal. Communal is kind of when something happens and then everybody gets involved with commenting and talking about and sharing when something happens. Personal tends to be between two people. This is what you think of as the private messages, the DMs, the messages on Facebook, maybe Skype. It's between you and another person. It's still within the social networking realm because it's permanent and because you can track it and things like that. But communal has to do with things like that. So I'm actually recording this. It's going to be on YouTube a little bit later. If you like, we can have a communal experience and you'll go and you'll comment and say, gosh, you were so horrible. And I would never recommend this to anybody else. But this is what we're looking at when we're talking about social media interaction. With personal or communal interaction, it's kind of two parts. And this part gets repeated, but there's action. There's something that happens, there's something that's said, there's the thing. Last night it was Stewart's post-game interview for the Seahawks. Nobody watches football here. Guy got excited about the football game and then made some comments, which were actually understandable comments. He was hyped, he just made the game when he played. He said, I'm the greatest in the world, can't nobody touch me, don't talk about me. And Twitter and Facebook and the internet exploded because he was yelling. And he was a black guy with dreads. Didn't cuss, wasn't antagonistic, wasn't angry. He was excited because he's going to the Super Bowl and he just made the game when he played. But they would call him thugs, he got class, all these different things. And this is the example of communal action. The reaction is the blog post to follow. It's the sharing on Facebook. It's the, hey, look at this guy. It's the, he's such a thug. It's the, hey, I love his hair. Whatever it is. He has nice hair. It's that reaction to whatever's going on. You also don't have to have action be a public thing. It doesn't have to be something that's happening in the real world. But somebody can say, that's what happened at the end of the day. And it's a wonderful sushi plate. It looks great. And people react to it and say, oh, it looks good. I wish I had something. Action, reaction. Then you can have reactions to reactions, where somebody makes a comment and then you react to the comment that they said in a positive or negative way. This is the Miss America pageant winner, Nina Davallari. This is an example of an action. She was the first Indian American to win the Miss American pageant in its 91-year history. And Twitter absolutely exploded. This is her Twitter page. She got a lot of followers, way more than me. And the Arab wins Miss America. Classic. Little background on Nina. Graduated from Syracuse University, magna cum laude. Has lived in New York her entire life. Happens to be of Indian descent, not Arab. But they're saying the Arab wins Miss America. How the fuck does a foreigner win Miss America? She is Arab. Nah, actually, she's Miss New York. Lived there her whole life. Miss Arab wins Miss America, and the score of the Seattle-San Fran game is 5-1 at the half. What is life? 9/11 was 4 days ago, and she gets Miss America. Insinuating that she might not have been hurt the exact same way that we were by 9/11, or that she or her heritage, who wasn't even Indians, that are accused of doing it. And that her winning Miss America is somehow an insult to the legacy and the tragedy of 9/11. I also did other things associated with terrorism. Miss America right now is Miss Al-Qaeda. Miss America is a terrorist. Whatever, it's fine. Miss America is brought to you by their sponsors P.F. Chang's and 7-Eleven. Miss America, you mean Miss 7-Eleven? Miss America, Foot-long buffalo chicken on whole wheat, please and thank you. Playing on the stereotype that people of Arab descent own and work in subways. This is the type of things that used to be out in front with old racism and old racist notions. And then with the evolution of society, was pushed into the dark and slid under the rug. But now that social media is kind of bringing these things back in front, you see it's still going on. If you ask these people, most of them would say I'm not racist. Most of them would say it's just a joke. Most of them would say I'm just having fun with my friends. And most of them would be right, because the way that they've been taught to think about these things is flawed at a very basic and very deep level, that they've been born into something that happened way before they even ever came into the picture. So what's going on with the Miss America thing? First thing is, this thing is white as normal or universal. When we go and we whitewash history, and we go and we say everybody in the history of the world is white, all the Roman senators were white, all the King Arthur's knights were white, everybody in the Bible was white, everybody in France was white, everybody in England was white, everybody other than Africa and Native Americans and China and Japan, because they don't get nothing else in Asia but China and Japan, was white. And it sets up this thing as white as normal or universal. There have been critiques of video games and fantasy now, and sci-fi movies that are coming out that have white, male, heterosexual protagonists all the time. And people have problems with it because you want to see the representation that has been in the world for the history of the world. And in our minds, like, we kind of feel like something's not right about this picture. But they say, this is what sells. Everybody can relate to a white protagonist. Everybody can relate to, it's the universal standard. It's the stock character of the world is a white person. And what that establishes that if it's not white, then it's other. If it's not white, then it's not normal. It's not supposed to be the way it is. It's not accepted. And then it reinforces this xenophobia or this fear of things that are other. This fear of things that are foreign. This girl, you know, she's done so much community service. She's done so many things to help the American fabric. But because she doesn't fit this stock character that's been taught and reinforced since anybody in this room was born, she's considered other. She's associated with something outside of the American context. She's associated with something antagonistic to the American context, such as terrorism or 9/11. Understandably so. In the history of the white American, Miss American, the Miss American United States pageant, I think it might have been like 1950 before people of color were even allowed to participate. Up to that point, in 90-something years, there have been 6 winners that were people of color. We had 2 African Americans, we had an Asian American from Hawaii, we had an Indian American, actually pretty early on in like the 1940s, which was dope. And then as of late, Miss Nina. This is a picture taken in 2011. I think it was like 46 of the living 66 pageants at the time. And you can kind of see what we've been taught to expect from a winner and a participant of the Miss America pageant. So when people are having this outrage that something they're seeing is going against everything they believe to be what Miss America is about and what beauty is and what the standard should be, you can kind of see how this image and this thought and this way of thinking was built. And nobody previously that had made these comments had ever designed a Miss America pageant, had ever written the contest rules, had, put these things in place, but they've all been influenced by it. They've all been taught by it. They all are the victims of this society. When you set anything that is of color as other, you dehumanize it. It can't be normal. It can't be righteous because this is what's righteous. This is what's right. This is what's okay. And everything else that doesn't fit this doesn't fit what we accept as the right way to do things. You also commodify it. You make it available for purchase. You make it available for consumption. You make it something like animals. Like animals are not human. And so you make animal cartoons, you have animal furs, all these things in their product become products. When you set something as different from human, or different from the standard of humanity, or different from normalcy, this is what you do to it. Sometimes you appropriate. There is a holiday in American context that is centered around this. Not necessarily in racial terms, but about the commodification and appropriation of things that we consider non-human, and it's Halloween. You dress up like vampires as an appropriation or commodification. You dress up as animals, you dress up as characters, you dress up as these things that are not necessarily human. You generally don't dress up as people, unless you're being cynical. But you don't come to a Halloween party as a CEO, or Bob from across the street, or little Jody from elementary class. You come as these things that you don't necessarily associate with the normal, everyday, day-to-day American context. So every Halloween, you have people dressing up in blackface. This is Julianne Hough. She was a contestant on Dancing with the Stars, and she's dressed up as what she said her favorite character from Black is the New Orange, which I guess is a new series. Orange is the New Black. Is it good? It's okay. Yeah. Never seen it, but she said she didn't know that this was not okay. Even though her friend actually came out later in a blog post, which is awesome about this user-generated content. Like, no, I told her, I said, this isn't okay, you should take it off. And that she actually lightened her makeup from what it actually was at the suggestion of her friend. But she still claims that she didn't know. It's not as bad as it is, though. Every Halloween, you have people of non-color dressing up in blackface. There's a grown-ass man dressed up like Serena Williams. You can see how we take these images and through the telling of history and the presentation of people of color throughout history and through the exclusion of people of color in normal situations, in normal religious contexts, in normal roles of fantasy, affects how we view each other. You see it in the cartoons with Tom and Jerry where everybody has these exaggerated features. You see it in Disney movies, the exaggerated features. And so now when we appropriate these things, she looks like a boy. She looks animalistic, she looks barbaric. It's not okay. This is another from the party. I didn't know this. Dr. Fairley actually taught me this when I was going over my research with her. This is not a male dress. It's not a male style of dress in African context. This is how women dress in Africa. And because you're appropriating this culture and you're taking this and you're commodifying it, you don't understand it. He's showing up to this party dressed up like an African woman. But they match, so that's cool. He's actually dressed more like men dress in Africa as opposed to women. What I want you guys to start noticing is some of this action-reaction thing going on at the bottom. And I'm going to read it to you. This is the action. This is the picture. And somebody said, obvious being creepy white guy in the background. That's this guy right here. This is Olivia that says this. This is Olivia commenting on the homepage of her party. The only creepy white guy that she sees in this picture is a silhouette in the background. Here you have an example of what I call positive reaction. Are you aware of racism yet in Austria? Very funny. And it's that simple. It's that quick. It's that effective. You don't have to be offensive. You don't have to try to hurt anybody. You don't have to try to knock anybody's block off. But it's okay to say, that's not cool. It's not okay. Issues with blackface. Why is it offensive? First of all, because of the historical significance of blackface. Blackface comes out of an American tradition where people of non-color portrayed people of color because we weren't allowed to portray ourselves. And when they did it, they dressed up in blackface, exaggerated the features, put huge lipstick around the lips, and reenacted every stereotype imaginable about people of that time. From the speech patterns, to the way that they partied, to their food habits and things like that. And then once black people were allowed to perform, blackface a lot of times was the only vehicle that they had as an artist to get their artistry out. So then you had black people propagating this blackface stereotype. Also, cultural appropriation. One of the arguments against cultural appropriation is that I'm just taking part in somebody else's culture. There's a difference between appropriation and sharing. Cultural appropriation happens when the people that you're taking from are not seen on an equal, respected level as you. You take it, you don't understand it, you don't take the time to get to know it, and you use it for your own entertainment and your own amusement. Cultural sharing generally happens when you have a relationship with somebody of another culture, and they tend to offer it up to you. But even if you take it, you take the time to understand what it's about. I had a Native American friend give me a dream catcher. You have the opportunity to say, hey, what is it about? You get a partner, a girlfriend or boyfriend of Spanish descent, and you decide to start learning Spanish, and you start learning how to make tortillas at home. All these different things, but it's coming from a level of equal value. It's not coming from the racial hierarchy, where these lower things, which are subhuman, can be taken and commodified and used. It's generally just disrespectful. This is not okay to mock people. When you remember that white is the standard, and we dehumanize, commodify, and appropriate things that are not white, it makes a lot more sense. One thing that people had a field day with this past Halloween was Trayvon Martin. This is Will, Caitlin, and Greg. They are just, your average American group of people. And they decided that they too would dress up for Halloween. And they dressed up like this. This is Trayvon Martin with the blood stain actually painted onto his sweatshirt. Her costume is called Robin the Hood, which is more cultural appropriation. He's dressed up as George Zimmerman for Halloween, and he's holding an imaginary gun to this person's head. When you don't view other people as human, you don't view their death as death. You don't see it in the same light. It's like a cartoon death now. It's like a video game death now, because it's not an actual person this is happening to. And it's done different. They weren't the only people that dressed up for, like Trayvon Martin. Also, the reaction to it. Not that funny. She's Robin Hood. Not cool. Not funny. It's okay. It's quick. It's quick. It's a quick check saying, hey, this isn't cool. This is also more, I gotta get this charger real quick because I'm getting ready to die. But this is the guy, Greg, defending his actions for the Halloween picture that he made. And so this is what you're gonna see when you have this reaction to the reaction thing. And sometimes it's positive. Sometimes it's people saying, that was really funny, I can't wait to do it, and it ends up being a conversation which is available for the community. But you got Alexander saying, yeah, this isn't racist at all. Actually, in his own way, saying like, yo, this isn't okay. And Greg dismisses it. Dismisses the critique of everything that he's been told. Dismisses the critique of his worldview. Says, you're right, now fuck off. I don't need to deal with your hippie liberal bullshit. When you don't give credence to somebody critiquing something that, whether you see it as right or wrong, but you might call it crazy, you might call it you're liberal. You throw it into this category, this easily dismissible box, and you kick it to the side. There were consequences for the lady that was involved in this. And this is kind of where you can see social networking being used as a tool to correct some of these behaviors. I read this. Earlier this morning, Caitlin Camino had her employer listed on her Facebook page, right next to all this racist stuff, but recently deleted it. Members of the Tumblr community took note of this employer before the deletion, and this is the screenshot that we're talking about. In the imaginary audience, we can see the work, and contacted them to report the incident. Around 12:54 p.m., I called the employer to report the incident, and they stated that she had been fired. Because she was engaged in this behavior and representing the company right next to this blatant racist behavior, she ended up losing her job. And this is the type of stuff that you have the ability and the power to do from your home, right from your computer screen, right from your cell phone, and you can, in little ways, chip away at this racist fabric. But you have to understand that the act is not the biggest problem. This one isolated incident is not the biggest issue, but it's the history and the concepts and the constructs around and supporting these racial hierarchies. And to prove that it's not an isolated incident, there were a lot of people that dressed up like Trayvon Martin for Halloween, complete with sweet tea and Skittles. For me, these two are absolutely it's tragic and it's messed up. But this is the picture that troubles me the most, is everybody's having a good time. Everybody is together celebrating around this symbol of death of this young black person. And whether legally you think it was just or not, whether you're a stand-your-ground proponent or not, whether the law is on or against your side, you have to understand that somebody died. And whether it was a legal death or an illegal death, the fact that somebody lost their life and you're dressing up and reenacting and everybody's drinking and having a good time around it, it's not cool. There's also this thing that came around on Instagram and Twitter called Trayvoning, where you had young people posing and reenacting the death of Trayvon Martin in different places. It follows in the tradition of planking, where you have people kind of laying up, Batman, where they were hanging upside down from doors and tables and things like that. And they were in the middle of sidewalks and at people's homes. There was one in a gym at a basketball game, laid out with Arizona and Skittles reenacting the death of Trayvon Martin, because it's not human, it's not real death, it's funny, it's fun, it's something to be celebrated. In the middle of a parking lot, in the middle of this home, and this is a nice home, like, I can see by the carpet, guys, like stacked. This was pretty bad. Here we got some chicken, we got some watermelon, we got some Kool-Aid, we got some liquor. Trayvon was drinking. Just adding all of these stereotypes into the disrespect of this young guy's death. And then you want to get your pet in on the act. Said my cat with Trayvon. Graphic coming up. The issue is the devaluing of life in general, but black men's lives in particular. And this is something that is pretty much ingrained in the society and the history of the United States. And this white privilege thing where you can take the expenses of somebody else and use it for your own amusement and use it for your own fun. Because it's not something that happens in your world. It's not something that you have to worry about. It's not something you have to think about. You're not going to see people of a similar group doing this because they know it can happen to me. When you don't have to worry about, hey, this can happen to me, this can happen to my loved one, this can happen to people that are in my realm, in my society, it becomes a joke. And that's, even though it's something that people of non-color haven't propagated and it's not something they've chosen, it's something that they're born into and it's something that they're taught. And you don't have to worry about these things happening to you because the history of the world isn't like that. When you see this and you look at it in the historical context and you look at it as the dehumanizing and the celebration of the death and the suffering of something that's not human, you're actually looking at this. This is the lynching of William Brown from 1919 in Omaha, Nebraska. A white woman got something, we don't even know. It might have been a talk, it might have actually been an assault, could have been a rape. The details on it are not clear. People got mad and they wanted to punish the first black man that they could find. They found him, they locked him up. A crowd of not just white men, women, children, an entire community gathered outside of the jail that he was held in and called for the sheriff to release him. The sheriff agreed to release him, but they said, we got some processing things that we got to do first. They wouldn't wait, so they burned down the courthouse. They burned down the courthouse and then ran into a burning building to go and get this man out. So they burned down the courthouse. Everybody that was working in the courthouse, the police, the judges, the secretaries, all out. And then they go into a burning building to go and pursue this man so they can bring him out and punish him. They hung him. While he was hanging, they shot him 100 times. After they shot him 100 times, they tied him to the back of a truck and dragged his body through town. And then they set him on fire. And you have here all these smiling faces in the background celebrating this death. If social networking was around back then, this would be on Facebook. This would be on Instagram. This would be the Trayvon. This would be the jokes about Miss America. Because in your mind, it's okay. Because of the way you've been taught, because of the way you've been trained, because of the way you've been socialized, because of what you believe about everything, religion, history, fantasy. This is cool. To us, now it discusses, it's hard to look at. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing in an evolved society. It represents the exact same thing. The pursuit of a young black man, innocent of a crime. The death of a young black man, innocent of a crime. And then the celebration. Pets included. The whole family. There's kids in here. A little background. This was a community event. Because of Web 2.0, we have the ability to discuss these things. When you see stuff like this, you can react. When you see somebody reacting in a way that is positive about it, that supports this behavior, that, hey, that's funny, let's go trade on it, you can say, that's not cool. That's not okay. It's an avenue for correction or reinforcement. And the biggest thing I gotta get you guys to understand, there's no middle ground. There's no passive fight. There's no passive stance in this. Because if you see this stuff and you don't say something, you are allowing the system to go unchecked and unchallenged. You know, saying something may not change the world, but at least there's a resistance. At least it's not gaining momentum and becoming further ingrained and entrenched in the minds so that for the next 50 years, the next 100 years, they don't have a choice. Young black boys, young white boys, young Asian boys, young Hispanic boys, and women do not have a choice about the images they're being fed and about the history that they're being taught and about the stories that they're reading when they grow up, because we don't react. Right now, it's almost impossible to find children's books and children's movies that feature persons of color because we don't react, because we don't say something, hey, this is cool. There's personal interaction, and it's direct. It's direct interaction with another person. Can be a responsible event, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be a conversation. Discussion is an example of a person interaction. This is my Twitter page. I have nowhere near the followers of Miss America, but one day I might get there. I am a recipient of the GI Bill because my late mother was in the armed forces, and what that does is that gives me a little bit